Expectation. Reality.
My disappointment is immeasurable.
Do you believe in your drive checks?
No.
Okay, let's be real here. I feel every single Vanguard player have their love-hate relationship with drive checks because most of the time these are where you lose or you win. And let me ask you this question. What if you have a deck that there is so much drive check that it kind of became its own weakness?
Interesting.
That is what I feel Impauldio actually does. And today, as usual, we're gonna be explaining why exactly is that, starting off of course with the right lines. As we have Proget. This unit only has one skill where when this unit is placed by riding from a grade 0 unit, you can reveal a grade 3 card with Impauldio in its name from the right deck and put a system code Exceed token into your order zone. So before we continue, I'm gonna be explaining what system code Exceed token does because it is the most important part of the deck, where this particular set order token has two particular skills. The first one is a restriction where you cannot write any other grade 3 or greater card aside from Impauldio, and you may have self-modification gauge. And then when a card is put into your damage zone during your opponent turn, you can choose a card from your drop and put it face up as your self-modification gauge. Then if you have 3 or less self-modification gauge and your other card other than trigger unit was revealed for this damage check, choose one of your Vanguard and it gets 5k until end of turn. If you have 4 or more self-modification gauge, choose one of your Vanguard and it gets plus 5k until end of turn.
Not bad.
Okay, so before we continue, I have to explain how this skill works because based on my testing, I see a few of my opponents confused the way it was phrased. So to put it simply, the way this card works is that you get a gauge every time you take a damage. After you turn one of your cards into a self-modification gauge, then you start counting. So if you have 3 or less and your damage check is not a trigger, you get 5k. But if you have 4 or more gauges, you get 5k regardless of what type of cards you check during your damage check.
Hey, that's pretty good.
So this is, in my opinion, a very good set order. For one, it doesn't consume an actual deck space. And secondly, this is actually quite a decent defensive skill, as it always gives you reward when you take a damage. Yes, in the earlier part of the game, this might not be as useful, but this does help the deck to fight against rush deck because the 5k increment is just enough to really disrupt some of the stronger rush deck we have seen in the format right now, like Shoutout.
No. He's got a point.
And for the self-modification gauge, unfortunately at the movement, it is used mostly as a counter in a certain way, as there is only one single card that is technically able to interact with the gauge themselves.
What the fuck?
And that is the grade 2 of the right line, Dora's Evolia. This unit only have one skill where when rolled upon by grade 3 card with Impauldio in its name, put a top card of your deck face up as your self-modification gauge, then choose one of your self-modification gauges and you may put it into your hand.
It's actually quite nice.
This card does add some complexity into this deck because this kind of forces you to think what are the cards you want to discard for your right, aside from the discard cycle obviously. But the point here is that these cards allow you to discard something that normally you wouldn't discard, so that you can actually fetch it back later using this card skill. It's a little bit of risky to give that knowledge to your opponent, but it is a way for you to get around it if you do feel like your hand is not good enough. And in all fairness, the skill is optional, so you can choose not to add any card back and you will still get more or less get the benefit of increasing the count, because counting the gauges is the most important aspect of this deck, as we see with this unit has only 2 skills, where act once per turn you can counter blast one, choose a card from your drop and you put it face up as your self-modification gauge. Then look at the top 5 cards of your deck, choose up to 1 grade 3 or less card among them, call to record, shuffle your deck. And then this unit get auto on Vanguard, or your front row unit gets 5k for every 2 of your self-modification gauges until end of turn.
That's a bit sassy.
Sound familiar? Because it kind of is, because it has a exact same power gaining condition as Koro. The only difference here is just what it is counting. And I feel this is the reason why you want to build as much gauge as possible, which gives a very interesting complexity to this deck, as this deck asks you to choose either to risk it all by taking a lot of damage but you hit really hard from that point onwards, or you choose to defend yourself early game and making sure that your damage count is low so that you can utilize system core defensive capability later on and then just burst all out with one single turn. I do think this complexity does make the deck a little bit more interesting to play and actually make you think on whether do you want to go all route or not, especially considering what this deck decided to exceed.
And that's drive check.
I don't like where this is going.
As we have where if your opponent Vanguard is grade 3 or greater and you have 4 or more self-modification gauge, you can counterblast one and discard one card, and this unit get additional crit and drive +2 until end of turn. So yeah, I think this is a very first grade 3 in D standard that actually has 4 drive. And we have seen this case before with Drugs Rider. 4 drive is a lot. And unless you have a really big hand or a PG, this attack will be very annoying to guard. But it is also the biggest problem with the deck as well. Because for one, the best way to get a lot of self-modification gauge quickly is through taking damage. So if you do not trigger the heal trigger at the right timing, this will lead you to having to guard for almost every attack subsequently, making it harder for you to defend in the later part of the game. And secondly, yes, 4 drive is insane. It is not broken because there is a chance of you whiffing.
Perfectly balanced, as all things should be.
So I do say it is good if you have a really good luck with drive checks, but terrible otherwise. But there is a silver lining here, as Impauldio technically have access to almost every single form of filtering in Proget. We have things like Boundary, we have things like Impauldio first skill, and we have things like Panspermia.
Genuinely disgusting.
Well, it got to do with, in my opinion, the most important support for Impauldio at the moment. Flying Conversion, Winster. You sure that's Winster? Cause that looks a little bit too much like a desert camo of Ball Krugler, at least to an extent.
Nice.
Regardless, this unit has 2 skills where during your turn, if you have 2 or more self-modification gauge, this unit get additional 5k, and if you have 8 or more self-modification gauges, this unit drive cannot be decreased by card effects. Say what? This part of the skill might sound weird, but it will make sense if you consider the second skill, where when this unit attack, if you have 4 or more self-modification gauge and no drive check were performed by battle Eureka attack this turn, you can counterblast one until end of that battle. This unit perform drive check, but it get drive -1 at the end of that battle by this unit. So this is where I'm saying Bushiroad give exceedingly copious amount of drive check for this deck, because the main rearguard is a card that do drive check as well. In all fairness, this card is good in its own right, but needing to hit 8 modification gauges to get a twin drive is a little bit too much for me, because to hit that number consistently, it is turn 6 at least, which is a little bit ridiculous, at least in my opinion. But it does have its own positive, and that is the fact that it is a grade 3. This means that running cards like Panspermia is actually a good thing in this deck, because you can consistently searching out for this card. So the fact that it can be easily searched out is actually a good thing, and does lead to a lot of drive check within the deck itself. It's just a little bit shame that you need to wait until very late game before you can use the full potential of this card, especially considering another main support that I consider for this deck, Nebula Invoke Dragon, is actually quite a disgusting card, as this unit has 2 skills where when this unit attack, you can Soul Blast one and this get power +5k until end of that battle. But if you have 5 or more gauges, you can +15 instead of 5k, and then this is also a 20k shield unit if you have 4 or more gauges in your order zone. This card is super strong, and I do feel this is the most important card in your deck because it allows you to Soul Blast very early on, having a bullet to essentially just charge your gauge. As the main issue with system code Exceed in the earlier part of the game is the fact that you won't have enough card in your drop to actually set your gauge if you get rushed by your opponent. So this card does help the deck quite a bit, and the fact that it is constant skill for the shield skill also means that you can utilize the Blitz order, right, the one from the DBT 11, which allow you to literally have at least 30k guard, which is a lot, especially considering you can run X-Striker in this deck as well, which allow you to essentially have a 1 card 40k shield, which is a pretty substantial amount.
Damn, boy, he's thick!
And now, time to talk about what is good for Impauldio and what's bad in Impauldio. Yes, there is only 2 cards I feel it worth expanding in Impauldio support at the moment, because the rest are either bad, or how are you going to expand talking about a grade 1 card that is essentially an 18k booster? Not much.
No, He's got a point.
So, what is good about Impauldio? Well, there is a few good things about Impauldio despite him essentially being a 3 attack deck. As for one, he does have a lot of attack pressure thanks to the fact that 2 out of 3 of his attack does some kind of drive checks, whether it's gonna be a twin drive, single drive, or even quadruple drive. And because of the amount of drive check you drew very excessively, this also makes this deck defensive capability really good, especially by considering system code exceed defensive capability on top of cards like Nebula Invoke, which not only have a very solid number of shield, but also able to combo with some of the unusual generic cards that most of the Vanguard will not play because they have 0 synergy with. The deck also have a very good filter, like you have once per turn filter from Impauldio on top of cards that you can run like Panspermia and Balderit as I mentioned earlier, making the deck hitting triggers a little bit more often but not enough to make it way too consistent like Eva does. But this is far from perfect for Impauldio because he is a 3 attack deck, and yes, the amount of dry check you have is insane, but it is RNG focused, and because of the fact that he doesn't have any other type of guard restrict, it can be simply stopped with one single PG. And the most important part, this is not a problem per se but a bit of a nitpick, the learning curve of utilizing system code exceed is not the easiest. Like you really know how to control your damage with this deck, and relying on getting a heal to essentially reuse your system code, it's just not exactly a good game plan because it is super RNG heavy, so controlling the damage is definitely a way to go and something you need to learn if you want to master your Impauldio. But what do you guys think? Personally for me, Impauldio being 3 attack deck is actually a nice surprise because of the fact that there are just way too little decks of this category now, and a lot of deck that used to be considered 3 attack deck has moved on and have more than 3 attack.
Rooting for you!
So I feel like it is a rare breed that I feel it should be kept alive for a little bit longer. But yeah, do leave down in the comments below on your thoughts. And that's all I have for today. Don't forget to clap that sub, become a member for some cool perks. And this is Mac Megane signing out.